Yeah, hey, yeah, it's your client, Chad. Chad White, the handsome host of News Time. Wink. No, I was winking to the camera. I'm not recording this. No, I'm not recording this. Okay, listen. No. You can't turn this around on me. How come I did not get the part in that Marvel movie? Huh? It's another movie filled with a bunch of white guys and one white woman. You jerks. Listen, listen. You don't understand. 20 films of the past couple years have had no black or African American speaking characters. 43 of them had no Latino speaking characters. 37 had no Asian speaking characters. That's crazy. 70.7% of the movies that were made for the last couple years are white. That's dumb. And get this, LGBT characters are also left behind. Of the 4,403 speaking roles, guess how many spoke that were gay, lesbian, and bisexual and transgender? 16, 9, 6, and 0 respectively. Can you believe that mess? Oh my gosh, I understand. And now, shut up. Now, women have had far less speaking roles in the top films of 2017 and the past few years than they did in 2008. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? Action or adventure, 2017, 24.5% of the female characters had speaking roles. Animation, 30.7. Comedy, 42.9. Can you believe it? Can you believe it? Where am I getting these numbers from? Well, I'm getting them from the Annberg Inclusion Initiative from USC Annberg. They did this study last year that did the same thing, and it told us basically the same numbers, and now they're doing it again. And women, directors, on screen, they're suffering. Women of color, they're suffering. And it's because of white men like you. You're worse than Ron. Yeah, Ron, my producer, he's a loser. Don't worry about him. Well, anyway, I gotta do news time. Okay, great. All right, bye. Stupid prick. Oh, crap. Was I recording this whole time? Fuck.
It's news time. Delivering to you the news you didn't know about, the news you didn't care about, and the news you didn't know you cared about. With host, Chad White. Now, here's that host, Chad White.
Oh boy, do I hate this haircut. Oh, welcome back to News Time. I'm your host, Chad White, and this is the comedy news that you didn't know about. As we move into the upcoming 2018-2019 television season, we prepare for a torrent of new shows. Shows on broadcast, shows on cable, shows on streaming. You won't be at a loss for entertainment. But as you watch those shows, I urge you to look at the casts and the crews. See how different they look from one another. What are you looking for exactly? Well, diversity, my dear boy. That's today's word. Even though people in the industry have been touting what they'd call better numbers both in front of and behind the camera, we found out this past summer that numbers have still been dwindling. This past weekend, we saw the release of Crazy Rich Asians, the first major motion picture to have an all-Asian cast. Crowds are loving it, and critics too, even if the movie follows traditional rom-com standards. Black Klansman has been making the rounds as of late, and weeks prior to that, both Sorry to Bother You and Blind Spotting were the hit indie flicks other than 8th grade to see. But as I mentioned in the last week's episode of this show, or maybe it was the Constitutionals podcast, who knows? No one watches this crap anyway. As I mentioned, Sorry to Bother You and presumably these other movies aren't doing Black Panther numbers. It's like the world only has room for one people of color-led movie in their consciousness at all times. And that's very important. The same can be said for TV shows too. Starz' Power returned with a 0.6 in the 18 to 49 demographic, which is about 1.55 million viewers, a drop from previous seasons' 0.8 and 1.68 million. Now that means the show was the most most viewed original series on cable, but it didn't have any competition, especially in that time slot. Still, though, it has a diehard fan base, and that's all a deep cable network like Starz can ask for. Back in March, following the Oscars, I did a story on The Thing. Frances McDormand and subsequently entertainment websites around the world would not shut up about for at least a whole month. Inclusion riders. Essentially, those are conditions people in the industry can include within their riders, in which they ask for foods or items or space to be allocated to them so that those behind the camera and in front of it can be diverse. So basically, I won't star in this movie unless you have a certain number of people of color on staff. It's great and smart and useful, but only in theory. So far, since that night, McDormand screamed about it on stage. Inclusion riders haven't been as big as they were for that month-long period. The only high-profile case of it is when Ava DuVernay hired all-female directors for Queen Sugar, but that was back in the summer of 2017, months before the inclusion rider thing, and still the only time it's happened. The story I did about inclusion riders also drew from the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative and Professor Stacy L. Smith's study, where they found that mostly white men outnumbered their female, LGBT, disabled, and colored counterparts. That didn't sound right. They worked on it for over a decade and found that even the speaking roles for women lacked. Back in October of last year, Dean of UCLA's Social Sciences and Professor of Sociology and African American Studies, Darnell Hunt, released a study with Color of Change wherein we found out that writers' rooms are severely lacking. Numbers were broken down by network. It turns out a lot of the channels that we watch are unsurprisingly very, very white. A year prior to that, I did an episode of On Comedy that covered the dwindling numbers of diverse writers in late-night writers' rooms. And in September of last year, I did a story on the Directors Guild of America's new numbers on the rising numbers of female and people of color directors. Numbers jumped up by only single, sometimes double-digit percentages, but not by much. So I recap all of this to pose this. Do you think all of this talk of diversity has made for more diverse people behind and in front of the camera? Please mark your answers in the blue book and turn them on my desk. No talking, please. The answer is no. Of course not. I wouldn't be doing this story if it were true. Professor Smith and the Inclusion Initiative are back with a brand new study, new findings, and the same exact outcome as last time. In fact, the numbers are only marginally increased, if that. Look at this. Speaking roles for women were higher in 2008 than they were in 2017. And get this, between 40 and 100 movies didn't even have speaking roles for Black, Asian, Latina, or disabled female characters. And out of 400 films from 2014 to 2017, only one transgender character showed up on screen. It's not just on or behind the camera either. Women are outnumbered both as directors and critics too. Yes, even your opinion is mostly swayed by some awkward white dude who is afraid to talk to a real girl besides the one in his D&D group. I can say that now because Nerds is cool now and Jocks is pumping our gas. Smith pointed out specifically that women of color are the ones taking a massive hit with this lack of diversity behind the camera. Can you imagine being one of 8 women who worked as directors out of 1,100 movies? It's sickening, but because we talk about it, we think someone else is going to do something about it. Smith suggests inclusion writers be one of the few solutions for Hollywood. She also suggests target inclusion goals, policy changes, and hiring women to balance out males, period. The last bit needs to be done by 2020, she suggests. The only question is, will it? Will any of this be done in a timely manner? Not to mention in a way that's not pandering to what people want. By that I mean we should get rid of the diversity slot, stop hiring friends, and try to find the best person for the job. That person may just happen to be Black, or a Latina woman, or a transgender person. It's up to the people who already have the jobs to usher the rest along. Before I go, I'd like to thank this week's sponsor, Emma Willman. Emma is a great New York comedian who now has her own televised special. She's a part of the new batch of the comedy lineup specials on Netflix that are dropping on August 31st. She's got a new quarter hour for you. let me tell you, I've seen it and I dig it. I was already a fan of Emma before this, but who cares? She's great. Watch Emma Willman in the comedy lineup on Netflix on August 31st. And that's all the news I have for you for this week on News Time. Why don't you subscribe and check out one of our other videos? Of course, you can always head to the website at cpluscomedy.com, where I swear to God, I will find a better haircut. You can follow us on Twitter at cpluscomedy. Follow me on Twitter at ChadBlackWhite. Like us on Facebook. Listen to the Constitutionals podcast on any place you listen to podcasts. And if you think that I reused that spot from last week, you're darn right I reused the same ad spot.